May 31st, 2026. I'm here in Athens, down at the bottom of the Acropolis. This isn't the best view of it, and then over here on the other side is the Agora, the birthplace of Athenian democracy, Temple of Hephaestus, and then here is this complex. This is sort of what you can expect from Greece. You can see the graffiti here, the trash. It's, as far as the Acropolis goes, it's a remarkable thing. It's not a small thing. But as far as like European capitals and monuments, it's fair to say that what is in Athens is really not worth a day or two, and perhaps not even that, depending, because of the way that the city is. It's a fascinating juxtaposition between these two things, which is the birthplace of democracy, and then seeing a city that's completely ceded their public spaces to all kinds of unbelievable graffiti. And you ask yourself the question, is exactly why that's permitted to be. One of the things about Greece and where it is and why it is the way that it is, it's a country of about 18 million people, and it sits on the margins of all of these different empires. You've got what was the Persian Empire, you've got the Romans, later on you had the Ottomans. So whereas other European powers were ensconced in the relative safety of their geographic areas, the Greeks sat sort of at the margins of these conflicts. And even at the end of World War II, they were torn apart by a civil war. So it's fascinating that a nation with such a history of genius has become what it is, which is, they've ceded these public spaces. They can preserve this area right here. This they're not going to tolerate graffiti, as you can see. The Acropolis, they're not going to tolerate graffiti. But everywhere else, if you look at it, it's unnerving to an American to come to a city that is covered in graffiti this much. We see it as a place that's unsafe. If you're an American, when you see places that are covered in graffiti that you're unlikely to be safe. And that's not necessarily the case here, that there's an attitude towards it, which is they don't see it that way. They see the graffiti as just something they don't have time to deal with. They've capitulated, in other words, and ceded their public spaces to these people who have decided that they're voicing something. There's a cultural aspect to it. They were ruled by the Ottomans for something like 400 years, and that gave them a different attitude. Tax evasion became a thing, opposing the government. But when they became their own government, they never made the transition from realizing it's their government. So they're opposing themselves in essence. They're attacking themselves. They're covering their own walls with graffiti, and they think that they're somehow rejecting, oppression, and it's a very foolish thing. It's the kind of thing that right-wingers and conservatives use as an example of what happens when left-wing politics reaches an absurd level, and they're not necessarily wrong. Greece is an example of that, but it's fascinating to see. This is the people who could have ruled the world, and in a way have, because all of our civilizations are developed from this cradle, this moment, and we all have our history and beginnings here, except for maybe the Asian civilizations, obviously. But we owe this debt of gratitude, unbelievable debt of gratitude to this place. And it's fascinating to be here and see what it's turned into and how it is, because the Greeks themselves would not have tolerated this in the original ancient Greeks. They would not have said, a citizen has no responsibility to make sure that, the walls of their own city are what they are. The individual has become more powerful than the polis, than the politics. And they wouldn't understand that. They wouldn't agree with that at all. But this is the world that we live in now.